I hear you're worried about there being plastic in your seafood, and that makes sense. There's a lot of plastic in the ocean. But let's talk about it. So the first thing you should probably know is that when it comes to meat protein, they all pretty much have the same levels of plastic within them, and that includes seafood. Statistically, there is negligible difference between the amount of plastics in our meat proteins. However, maybe the thing that you should consider is that when it comes to meat proteins, seafood is the most sustainable. But I digress. Now, when it comes to the question of is that plastic harmful to our health, the answer is we don't know. This study quite literally says there is insufficient data and we just need to do more research. But if you would still like to reduce the amount of plastic that's in your meat protein, then we can look at this study, and I guarantee it's going to surprise you because it surprised me. Their hypothesis is basically what we would assume, right? The higher the trophic level, the more plastic in the fish. So things like tuna are going to be at the top of that chain. They're going to have the most plastic. Then things like reef fish, so dory down here, going to have very little amounts of plastic. However, after analyzing a ridiculous amount of papers, this was actually what they found. So still, yes, those reef fish are at the bottom, but our tuna are about the same. And the ones that had the most plastic were these small pelagics. So these are like sardines and anchovies, even though I think these are also anchovies. The study was a little bit confusing. And at the end, even though they had analyzed hundreds of studies, they even said there just wasn't enough data to make a concrete assessment. And the difference of the amount of plastic within these fish is quite negligible. It's a lot smaller than they were initially hypothesizing. A lot about their initial hypothesis was incorrect. Again, considering the tuna and the reef fish have about the same amount of plastic within them. The most surprising to me is that these small pelagics have the most amount of plastic. However, once you think about it, that does make sense as they like to be in that epipelagic zone, so the top of the ocean where a lot of our plastic floats. So that's what they swim through, that's what they consume. So there's your sort of answer. You asked the right person this question because I recently worked at a bivalve research station with a researcher who has been working on bivalves for the past 20 years. And people ask this question a lot, so I know his answer at least. Also, this is him, by the way. I took this picture while working there. His name is Dr. Timothy Green. This is him literally working on their oyster research project. They were working on disease resilience for oysters. Anyways, the answer is they're pretty safe to consume. Actually, one of the more safe seafoods to consume in the variety of seafoods that there are. Like compared to pufferfish, pretty dang safe to consume. The only downside of bivalves is they do carry disease more frequently. So if you are foraging bivalves from nature by yourself, you do have to carry that risk. But if you're getting farmed bivalves, they are tested pretty regularly, so it's pretty dang safe. And I totally get that you're like, how is that possible when they're literally filters? And there's two things there. One, they don't just filter by how they consume things, they also filter by how they move water. And I'll show you that in just a second. But the second part is that they are very, very good at filtering out what they actually consume. So around this whole mantelpiece, they have little tentacles, and those little tentacles can feel out what's happening. And then also they have this mechanism called a labial palp. No, I didn't come up with that name. Don't look at me like that. But the labial palp feels what goes into it before the mouth. Like this is before the mouth, before the esophagus, before the stomach is their little labial palp. And that basically brings in only organic materials. So anything that's plastic or not consumable, the labial palp's gonna push out. So what actually goes into the oyster is pretty much all organic material. So again, pretty safe to consume. Now back to point one, remember how I said it's also about how they move water? So they have an import and an export. This is for respiration. So they're constantly moving water. Now again, this is for respiration, so it's not necessarily staying within their system, but it is constantly moving the water around. So that's another way that they're keeping the water clean, is just simply moving it.